Steve Coll, a distinguished Pulitzer Prize-winning author, presents in The Achilles Trap Saddam Hussein, the CIA, and the Origins of America's Invasion of Iraq, what is positioned as a definitive and voluminously researched investigation into a tumultuous period of modern history. Published by Penguin Press on February 27, 2024, the work has been described by a Central Intelligence Agency reviewer as another tour de force and potentially the definitive work on the matter for years to come, underscoring its anticipated scholarly impact. The book meticulously endeavors to untangle the complex web of personalities, power ploys, and geopolitical machinations that culminated in the United States' deeply controversial invasion of Iraq in 2003. At its core, The Achilles Trap scrutinizes the decades-long fraught relationship between the United States and Saddam Hussein's Iraq. A central enigma that Coll seeks to unravel is the perplexing question of why Saddam Hussein appeared to court disaster by projecting the image of possessing clandestine stockpiles of weapons of mass destruction, WMDs, that were ultimately never found post-invasion. This paradox serves as a narrative linchpin driving the exploration of miscalculations and deceptions. Coll's methodology is distinguished by its reliance on an enormous cache of unpublished documents, many procured through persistent Freedom of Information Act requests. Perhaps most significantly, the analysis draws upon an extensive archive of Saddam Hussein's own recorded conversations, transcripts, and audio files. Sources estimate between 1,000 to 2,000 hours, many of which were previously inaccessible to the public. This unique evidentiary base, supplemented by interviews with surviving participants, American officials, former intelligence analysts, and regional experts, allows for an unusually intimate glimpse into the Iraqi dictator's mindset and decision-making processes. The consistent assertion across multiple reviews and descriptions that The Achilles Trap offers the definitive narrative stems largely from this integration of novel primary source material. By presenting Saddam's perspective and internal deliberations with unprecedented depth, the book aims to move beyond predominantly Western-centric viewpoints, potentially offering a significant re-evaluation of the events leading to war. The puzzle of Saddam's WMD posture is thus not merely a question of military hardware, but a profound inquiry into dictatorial psychology, strategic bluffs, and the tragic consequences of mutual, deeply entrenched misunderstandings. Steve Coll endeavors to present a nuanced portrayal of Saddam Hussein, moving beyond simplistic caricatures to explore the complex and often contradictory nature of the Iraqi leader. A dominant characteristic highlighted is his profound paranoia. He was a man convinced the world was out to get him and acted accordingly. This pervasive suspicion, particularly regarding American intentions, was a consistent feature of his worldview for decades. Indeed, some analysis within the book suggests this paranoia regarding US motives was probably justified given the historical context of American actions in the region. His reasoning was reportedly impossible to reduce to a simple explanation, with successive US administrations and the CIA frequently failing to grasp the critical nuances of his paranoia, resentments, and inconsistencies. Saddam harbored beliefs that the US inherently favored Israel and came to view American and British accusations regarding WMDs as mere propaganda lines designed to legitimize a predetermined agenda of regime change. This psychological profile was coupled with undeniable brutality. Saddam was directly responsible for the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Iraqis and the torture or imprisonment of countless more. His cruelty extended even to members of his own family, and his inner circle of diplomats, scientists, and generals operated under a system where deferral to his will was absolute. Yet, Coll introduces elements that complicate the image of a purely monstrous figure. Saddam reportedly enjoyed the novels of Ernest Hemingway and Naguib Mahfouz, and was, at the time of the US invasion, dedicating himself to the study of Arabic grammar. He delivered lectures on the dangers of narcissism, a trait ironically applicable to his own leadership, and even authored novels, one of which, metaphorically addressing regional dynamics, was published just days before the 2003 invasion. This more intricate portrayal is not intended to absolve Saddam of his atrocities, but to provide a more accurate psychological framework crucial for understanding his decision-making and consequently the reactive errors made by the United States. The consistent US failure to grasp these nuances, often reducing Saddam to a one-dimensional villain, may have led to misinterpretations of his signals and missed opportunities for alternative diplomatic engagements. The Achilles trap chronicles what is described as a rollercoaster of US-Iraqi relations spanning 3 decades, commencing with Saddam Hussein's consolidation of power in 1979. During the Reagan administration in the 1980s, the relationship was marked by strategic expediency and duplicity. Initially, Saddam's regime accepted intelligence support from Washington during the brutal Iran-Iraq War. However, this tentative cooperation was shattered when Saddam learned in 1986 of the secret US sale of arms to his adversary, Iran, as part of the Iran-Contra scandal. This episode profoundly deepened his distrust of American intentions. Compounding this, the Reagan administration was simultaneously providing Saddam's military with detailed maps to aid its war efforts against Iran, while approving arms sales to Tehran. Furthermore, President Reagan, viewing Saddam as a preferable alternative to Iran's Ayatollahs, supported Iraq's invasion of Iran and largely downplayed Saddam's use of chemical weapons and genocidal atrocities against his own Kurdish population. Such early policy decisions, characterized by contradiction and strategic cynicism, laid a foundation of mistrust that would plague US-Iraq relations for years to come, significantly contributing to the eventual conflict. The George H.W. Bush administration saw further mixed signals. Attempts to reassure Saddam prior to his 1990 invasion of Kuwait were followed by decisive military action in the 1991 Gulf War and the subsequent imposition of stringent sanctions and disarmament protocols. This period established a pattern of confrontation that would define the relationship. Under President Bill Clinton, the US pursued a dual-track policy. His administration continued a covert action program codenamed DB Achilles, aimed at fomenting a coup against Saddam. However, this initiative was reportedly poorly resourced and considered to have little chance of success, inadvertently empowering controversial Iraqi opposition figures like Ahmad Chalabi. Simultaneously, the US pressed for transparency regarding Iraq's WMD programs. Cole suggests that Clinton recognized the potential value of direct dialogue with Saddam's regime to better understand its WMD intentions, but refrained from such engagement due to fears of being perceived as politically weak by domestic opponents. This approach, running covert regime change operations while demanding transparency, created a situation where, as Cole argues, the US deluded itself into believing Saddam could ever be genuinely convinced of his disarmament under such duplicitous circumstances. This complex and often contradictory history culminated in the 2003 invasion under President George W. Bush, whose administration unequivocally asserted that Iraq, under Saddam, possessed WMDs that posed an imminent threat to global security. The decades of interaction reveal a symbiotic nature of paranoia and deception. US actions, often perceived as duplicitous or inconsistent, fueled Saddam's inherent paranoia, while his paranoid reactions and strategic ambiguity were, in turn, consistently misinterpreted or underestimated by Washington. This created a destructive feedback loop where genuine communication and de-escalation became virtually impossible, making the misunderstanding a shared responsibility. Time code 00:08:07:000 to 00:08:17:000. The question of Iraq's weapons of mass destruction lies at the heart of the Achilles trap, serving as the principal justification for the 2003 invasion and the central point of contention and misunderstanding. A stark reality confronted the United States and its allies after the invasion. Despite insistent pre-war claims, no stockpiles of WMDs were discovered. Cole's research supports the assessment that by 2003, Iraq possessed no active WMD programs. This lack of active programs was apparently so well concealed, or the disarmament so complete, that even members of Saddam Hussein's own inner circle were reportedly unaware or disbelieved that he had dismantled these capabilities in the months leading up to the invasion. The narrative suggests that Saddam had, in large measure, complied with international expectations regarding WMD disarmament following the 1991 Gulf War. However, he proved either unable or unwilling to convincingly demonstrate this compliance to the international community, particularly the United States, or even to his own senior officials. Indeed, after 1991, hundreds of UN inspections found little concrete evidence of ongoing programs, leading to a belief on Saddam's part that the CIA was aware of his lack of WMDs. This reality starkly contrasts with Saddam's public posture and actions, raising the pivotal question that Cole investigates. Why did Saddam cultivate an impression of WMD capability if it was largely a facade? One theory explored within the book is that Saddam was engaged in a strategic bluff, primarily aimed at deterring regional adversaries, particularly Iran. However, the evidence for this is presented as somewhat ambiguous, as Saddam did not always appear overtly fearful of Iran, and reportedly believed that if Iran were to acquire WMDs, the United States and Israel would intervene to destroy them. Regardless of the primary motivation for this ambiguity, Saddam's persistent boasting and obstruction of UN inspectors convinced many international observers that he was indeed concealing proscribed weapons or programs. From his perspective, the relentless American and British accusations regarding WMDs were not genuine concerns, but merely propaganda lines designed to justify a long-desired regime change. This conviction fueled his suspicion of UN disarmament inspectors, whom he often viewed as spies operating with a hidden agenda to undermine his rule. This dynamic suggests a potential double bluff. Saddam may have known he possessed no significant WMDs and simultaneously assumed the US intelligence apparatus also knew this, leading him to interpret US accusations as purely political maneuvering. His fatal miscalculation in this scenario was failing to recognize that the US either genuinely came to believe its own intelligence assessments, however flawed, or found it politically imperative to act as if it did. This profound failure of accurately gauging the other's perception and intent created a fatal spiral of misunderstanding. Cole addresses the significant US intelligence failure concerning Iraqi WMDs with a degree of nuance. While acknowledging that the US intelligence community was unequivocally wrong in its pre-war assessments, he argues that the unique circumstances within Iraq, its extreme secrecy, and Saddam's deceptive practices made an accurate assessment extraordinarily difficult, perhaps even impossible. A crucial factor contributing to this failure was the intelligence community's institutional memory of having underestimated the scope and advancement of Iraq's WMD programs prior to the 1991 Gulf War. This previous error created a strong determination within the intelligence agencies not to repeat such a mistake, likely fostering a bias towards overestimation or erring on the side of caution in subsequent assessments. Under intense political pressure and operating in an environment of high uncertainty, the CIA seemingly confirmed the existence of WMDs, even if the underlying intelligence was not definitive. This illustrates how institutional biases, historical experiences, and the immense difficulty of penetrating a closed society can converge to produce deeply flawed intelligence assessments, where the fog of uncertainty is amplified by the ghosts of intelligence past. Successive US presidential administrations, as Cole details, struggled to grasp the intricacies of Saddam Hussein's mindset. a failure partly attributable to the limitations or influence of CIA analyses. The agency was also tasked with executing covert operations aimed at destabilizing or overthrowing Saddam's regime. One such notable effort was codenamed DB Achilles. However, these covert action programs were often under-resourced and proved largely ineffective. Critically, they may have been counterproductive, not only failing to achieve their objectives, but also empowering dubious Iraqi opposition figures like Ahmad Chalabi, who would later play a controversial role in providing intelligence that supported the case for war. The internal challenges within the CIA's Iraq operations were starkly illustrated by the sardonic nickname given to its Iraq Operations Group in the late 1990s, the House of Broken Toys. Adding to these difficulties was the immense pressure from the White House across administrations, which sometimes appeared to expect intelligence to provide a magical solution to the Saddam problem. Cole argues specifically that the Clinton administration's policy of simultaneously pursuing covert regime change efforts while demanding WMD transparency from Saddam created an inherently contradictory situation. This dual approach fostered a delusion within US policy circles that Saddam could ever be genuinely persuaded to disarm transparently, while knowing the US was actively seeking his ouster. From Saddam's perspective, any transparency under such conditions could be interpreted as a sign of weakness, or worse, as providing actionable intelligence to those plotting his downfall. These long-standing covert efforts, therefore, likely exacerbated Saddam's paranoia and his unwillingness to cooperate, poisoning the well for any potential diplomatic resolution. Cole posits that delusions held by several US administrations, coupled with Saddam's own miscalculations, rendered the eventual military confrontation almost inevitable. The Reagan administration's contradictory policies, supporting Iraq against Iran while simultaneously engaging in secret arms deals with Tehran, sowed confusion and deep mistrust in Baghdad. Later, the George H.W. Bush administration sent mixed signals before and after Iraq's invasion of Kuwait, further muddying Saddam's understanding of US red lines and resolve. A significant factor highlighted is how domestic political considerations within the US sometimes critically impaired effective foreign policy. For instance, President Clinton reportedly refrained from engaging in direct dialogue with Saddam's regime about its WMD programs, not primarily due to a strategic assessment, but out of fear of domestic political criticism, specifically being accused of weakness by his political opponents. This reluctance to engage directly hindered opportunities for clearer understanding and allowed misperceptions to fester. By the late 1990s, particularly with the rise of global terrorism as a major concern, an increasing number of US officials began advocating for more aggressive measures against Iraq. The narrative woven by Cole is one of profound and reciprocal misjudgment. The book repeatedly emphasizes that corruptions of power, lies of diplomacy, and vanity on both sides led to avoidable errors of statecraft. Saddam Hussein consistently underestimated American resolve or fundamentally misunderstood US intentions, particularly in the drastically altered geopolitical landscape following the September 11th terrorist attacks. This belief on Saddam's part arguably became a self-fulfilling prophecy, as his resultant behavior further convinced Washington of his duplicity and hostile intent. Steve Cole's central argument in The Achilles Trap posits that the 2003 invasion of Iraq was not the result of a single factor, but rather the culmination of decades of deeply ingrained human failings and systemic miscalculations on both sides of the conflict. The book is consistently described as a deeply researched and news-breaking investigation into how human error, cultural miscommunication, and hubris led to one of the costliest geopolitical conflicts of our time. This thesis is reinforced by the assertion that corruptions of power, lies of diplomacy and vanity on both sides led to avoidable errors of statecraft. Cole seeks to move beyond simplistic narratives of blame, reminding readers that decision-makers, whether in Washington or Baghdad, are fallible individuals, susceptible to sometimes fatal flaws that lead them to make horrendous choices. The emphasis on lies of diplomacy and Saddam's perception of WMD accusations as mere propaganda underscores a critical theme: the destructive capacity of competing narratives and the pervasive inability to discern truth from deception when trust has completely eroded. When diplomatic channels are perceived to be conduits for falsehoods and public pronouncements are dismissed as strategic disinformation, the very foundation for rational decision-making crumbles, allowing constructed narratives, whether based on fact, fear, or political expediency, to drive actions with catastrophic results. A cornerstone of Cole's analysis is the unprecedented access to Saddam Hussein's personal audio recordings and other previously unpublished documents. These materials provide what is described as a more intimate picture of the dictator's thinking about world politics, local power, and his relationship to the United States than has been seen before. By integrating these sources, Cole is able to elevate Saddam's side of the conflict and introduce substantial new information regarding the origins of the invasion, offering insights into the Iraqi leader's private deliberations, motivations, and his often flawed assessment of the world around him. This allows for a more granular untangling of the people, ploys of power, and geopolitics that propelled both nations towards war. However, Cole, drawing on his journalistic experience, also acknowledges the inherent limitations and potential pitfalls of relying heavily on oral histories and captured materials for interpreting contemporary events, such as the possibility of flawed memories, score settling, personal biases, and limited scope informing some of the narratives presented. The title of the book itself, The Achilles Trap, is imbued with multiple layers of meaning. Overtly, it refers to DB Achilles, the codename for a covert CIA operation aimed at overthrowing Saddam Hussein. This direct reference grounds the title in the clandestine history of US-Iraq antagonism. However, the metaphor extends further, alluding to Saddam Hussein's own reported musings on how even powerful strongmen possess their Achilles heel, a fatal vulnerability. The irony, as Cole presents it, is that Saddam failed to recognize this wisdom as being profoundly applicable to himself, particularly regarding his own paranoia, ego, and strategic miscalculations. The juxtaposition of the CIA operation's codename with Saddam's own philosophical reflections on vulnerability highlights the tragic ironies and convergences that characterize the narrative. The trap was not merely one set by an external adversary, rather it signifies a more complex entanglement where the critical vulnerabilities of both protagonists, Saddam's regime and successive US administrations, were exposed and exacerbated by the actions and inherent flaws of the other. In this sense, both sides were caught in traps that were, at least in part, of their own making, leading to a mutually destructive outcome. The title thus encapsulates a complex web of interconnected weaknesses and errors, portraying a tragedy born from these fatal flaws rather than a straightforward tale of aggressor and victim. The decisions and miscalculations detailed in the Achilles Trap culminated in events that had profound and lasting repercussions, both in terms of human cost and the broader geopolitical landscape. The 2003 US-led invasion and subsequent occupation of Iraq are described as disastrous, leading to immeasurable human suffering. Estimates indicate the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Iraqi civilians alongside thousands of American service personnel and contractors. Beyond the immediate casualties, the war ushered in a period of anarchy and decades of political chaos within Iraq, fundamentally destabilizing the nation and the wider region. Cole's work underscores the argument that these events forever changed the political landscape as we know it. One of the poignant observations highlighted is that the deposition of a tyrant by foreign intervention, as exemplified by Saddam's removal, often leads to anarchy, a historical lesson with parallels drawn even to Napoleon that seems to have been overlooked or insufficiently weighted in the calculus leading to war. Warnings from regional actors, excluding Kuwait, that the invasion would further destabilize an already volatile Middle East were present, but apparently unheeded. The Achilles Trap is positioned as a work of great historical significance, offering a deep dive that illuminates previously unstudied and unexamined aspects of personalities, policies, events, and reactions of great consequence to both countries. By leveraging new evidence, particularly Saddam Hussein's recorded conversations, Cole provides what some reviewers consider the most memorable and uniquely multifaceted picture of the Iraqi dictator to date. The narrative is described as a compelling tale even for those steeped in the sordid history of US-Iraqi relations, suggesting its value extends beyond a mere recounting of events to offer fresh perspectives and deeper analytical insights. Crucially, the book is presented not just as a historical record, but as a lens through which to understand contemporary challenges. It is suggested that the Achilles Trap offers few better roadmaps to where American foreign policy in the Middle East has ended up today. This implies that the errors in judgment, the intelligence failures, and the flawed decision-making processes detailed by Cole are not merely historical footnotes, but have had a lasting, formative impact on US strategy, its credibility in the region, and the complex dynamics of the modern Middle East. The Iraq War, born from the decades of miscalculation that Cole meticulously dissects, fundamentally altered the strategic environment, and current policy dilemmas are, in many ways, direct or indirect consequences of this pivotal conflict and its troubled origins. Steve Cole's The Achilles Trap serves as a comprehensive and sobering analysis of the decades-long path to the 2003 Iraq War, offering critical reflections on the nature of international conflict, leadership, and intelligence. The central thesis compellingly argued throughout the work is that the Iraq War was not an isolated event, but the tragic outcome of decades characterized by mutual miscalculation, profound human error, deeply flawed intelligence assessments, pervasive paranoia, and significant hubris on the part of both Saddam Hussein's regime and successive United States administrations. Cole meticulously deconstructs the WMD delusion, exploring Saddam Hussein's paradoxical behavior of projecting strength he did not possess, while simultaneously believing the United States was aware of his actual capabilities. The introduction of previously unavailable evidence, most notably Saddam's personal audio recordings, provides unprecedented insight into his mindset, allowing for a more nuanced understanding of his motivations and his critical misinterpretations of American intentions. The Achilles Trap transcends a mere historical account to become a potent cautionary tale. It underscores the inherent complexities of international relations, the grave dangers posed by flawed or politicized intelligence, the corrupting influence of political hubris, and the catastrophic consequences that can arise from a fundamental failure to understand foreign leaders, cultures, and regional dynamics. The narrative vividly illustrates the necessity of comprehending the intricate alphabet of problems, contradictions, special interests, history, and religion that define volatile regions.